and the reauthorization of the United States Generalized System of Preference and the Potential Critical Minerals Agreement. These measures will amplify our role in global value chains and drive economic growth for both our nations. The proposed United States-Philippines Partnership Act is a testament to our shared vision. This landmark legislation lays foundation for deeper economic cooperation, particularly in critical minerals and infrastructure development, aligning with our goals of sustainable and inclusive growth. Under the new Trump administration, we are optimistic about renewed interest in a possible Philippines-United States FTA. This is an opportunity to craft a new generation trade agreement that not only expands market access but also upholds the highest standards of labor rights, environmental protection, and social inclusivity. I am confident to say that the Philippine government is not just advocating for open trade, but we are actively creating an environment where it can flourish. Our bold reforms include amendments to the Foreign Investment Act, Public Service Act, and Retail Trade Liberalization Act. Demonstrate our commitment to attracting investment, fostering a more integral and vibrant global market. Under the Marcos administration, these primary efforts of the Department of Trade and Industry are focused on fostering international collaboration and employing targeted and forward-looking trade strategies or policies. We are the forefront of supporting industry development, boosting export-oriented growth, and promoting an enabling environment for facilitating sustainable strategic environment. The time for action is now. Let us seize this moment to build an Indo-Pacific where economies are not just interconnected, but truly integrated, where businesses thrive, where prosperity is shared by all. Under the visionary leadership of our President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. and the Bagong Pilipinas Agenda, the Philippines is ready to lead this charge. We invite you to join us on this journey towards a more prosperous and inclusive Indo-Pacific region. Together, let us continue making it happen in the Philippines, and let us make it happen across the Indo-Pacific. Thank you and good morning to everyone.
Thank you so much, Madam Secretary. We deeply appreciate your comments and your joining us this morning. I would like to invite now the members of the panel for Reimagining Trade Today, Indo-Pacific Priorities vis-a-vis Trump 2 U.S. trade policy. So the Honorable Brent Sadler with the Heritage Foundation will join us, along with Lou Pugliaresi, the President of Energy Policy Research Foundation. Please join us on the dais.
Before that, Congressman Pittenger, may we request our keynote speaker to please come up on stage for the for an photo opportunity with Congressman Pittenger, and for the extension of tokens. May we also request Congressman Benvenido M. Abante Jr., Deputy Secretary Grace N. Andres, for the exchange of tokens.
All right, good morning. My name is Brent Sadler, and thank you again for the warm hospitality that's been extended from the House of Representatives and the Speaker's office in particular, and of course, Congressman Pittenger. Very much, thank you. Let's see, make sure everyone can hear me. Usually as a Navy man, I'm not accused of having a problem projecting, but if everyone in the back can hear me, I don't see any hands, so that, oh, now I do, so I guess that means you can hear me. So this panel, this discussion is going to be, it's going to be hard to really get at very specifics and definitive answers. So I kind of forewarn you on this. The topic is, what is in store for the world on a Trump second term when it comes to trade policies? There are some things that we can discern because this is not his first time as President of the United States, and many actions have already been taken in like the last week and a half. In fact, I thought I would try to prepare and try to have a longer kind of narrative to say what has or what would be coming, and the news just keeps changing. In fact, this morning as I was kind of going through my notes, we had the announcement that Mexico and Canada are deploying 10,000 troops to our north and southern borders. This, of course, was something that President Trump had insisted on, and it was some of the conditions, not all, and we'll get into a little bit about more of what's going on behind these tariffs that are now put on hold for 30 days. So bottom line is the world is an interesting place, and it's changing rapidly. And under the leadership of President Trump and his return to the White House, things are about to get exciting, and I think there's a lot of good news coming for all of us, especially America and its allies and its erstwhile partners like the Philippines. So one of the other things that kind of stay at this point, when I get asked, what can we expect in the Trump administration? I always go back to, well, you already know. Look back at his first term. And so the past is prologue to what we're going to see, not the whole next 4 years, but certainly in the next 100 days, his first 100 days in office. And at this point now, I got to give you the legal caveat, and I'm not going to give you the standard one, but just to say that I don't have any firsthand knowledge or insight as into what specific policies that President Trump is contemplating, what he likely will do. I do have some insights from across those that are close, but again, he has surprised many, and he will continue to surprise many. But there are some founding principles and some strategic objectives that I think it's important to kind of focus in on. And as the guy at the Heritage Foundation, as a senior research fellow for national defense, specifically maritime, I tend to look through the lens of security to include the economics. And this is something that's important to note. The United States, over the last few years, has come to terms with the reality, and I'll talk more about this later in the day, where we have to merge economic statecraft with diplomacy and military statecraft, something that I'll just talk more about called naval statecraft. So the confluence of economics, trade, and military, start looking at those as kind of integrated. And again, the security on the northern southern borders and the use of tariffs to get to some forward momentum is just the most recent, the current example of this kind of confluence of these two efforts. So what are some of the likely strategic focus areas that we can expect when it comes to trade policy, but also in the understanding of security? The first is, and it was a campaign promise, was security against illegal migration and all of the other ills that come with that. And that we know there are many evils that have been associated with it. One that's the top of the list is the trafficking in narcotics, fentanyl, enabled by the Chinese Communist Party, but under the vehicles of the drug cartels, many of them based in Mexico, but not limited to just Mexico. And those porous borders are an economic as well as a security threat to the United States. The economic piece of it, of course, these are partners with the USMCA and free trade. which I'll get to as another theme we're going to touch on with the security part. So, as already mentioned, Canada and Mexico putting 10,000 soldiers on the border. We'll see how effective that is. That's another kind of theme with President Trump is words are great, but it's the actions that really speak the loudest, and the same would be the way in which the United States will be judging and deciding whether or not those tariffs will go into full force in 30 days or somewhere in between. The other is when it comes to the USMCA, this is the free trade with our partners to the north and to the south. The Chinese have actually used this to circumvent previous efforts to sanction them or to go after their unfair trade practices, most notably the dumping of aluminum and the moving of it, trying to get it through third-party countries, which included Mexico. So again, these tariffs and the way that they are applied should be not only the security, but also with China in mind, though it may not seem as obvious. The next, which is another theme I think you're going to see, and again, informing or animating President Trump's trade policies going forward, another campaign promise, and that is the reindustrialization or the improvement of the American workers' lot. But it's really a reindustrialization. I'd say I would not be surprised, and it has been said several times, that one of the top priorities is the maritime industry, shipbuilding, shipping, which of course helps my favorite, the U.S. Navy, in meeting its missions. One of the key points on this is you're going to see a lot of focus in very near term on getting the Ships for America Act revised and approved, and then implemented very quickly. There may even be executive orders to that effect to try to kickstart this very strategically important industry, but also one that is in need of a lot of attention. The other part of this in the reindustrialization is also with the unions and the workers. This relationship is still a little bit tenuous in my estimation. We had a dock workers strike back in the fall. They actually walked out, shut down port traffic. We had a deal early on in January that seemed to kind of put that to a side, but there's a question about how does the United States modernize its ports and its shipping industry? This might come back later. But inside that's an opportunity for partnering and working with countries like the Philippines, a merchant mariner powerhouse in the global stage. Now, the other part on this one with the reindustrialization, tariffs serve a purpose. They're used as a tool. It's not purely for economics. It's actually for things like security. It's also changing policies, but it's also a third item that's not talked enough about. They also help change the economic environment, shifting the supply chains more favorable to the United States, but more broadly to free and open markets to benefit from that. Friendshoring, in one group will say, onshoring, of course, when it's specifically the United States. So these tariffs, 10% additional on China, the 25% on Canada, and the 25% on Mexico, they also serve the purpose to try to level out and mitigate China's ability to work around the USMCA in this particular iteration. But the tariff should also be viewed as how to actually adjust the supply chains to be more resilient and less open to coercion or interference by the Chinese Communist Party. Which gets me to the third and the final theme that I think you can see in these trade policies as they come forward, and this new kind of thinking of trade, which is really not that new. As I mentioned, the past is a prologue, and that is a focus to try to improve our supply chains. Shipping serves that. Working through reindustrialization does build in more resiliency to supply chain problems, which we had seen from the Suez Canal when it got shut down, when you had a container ship turned sideways in it, the Houthis and their ongoing attacks against shipping, of course, all the COVID-0 policies in mainland China that completely caused backlogs in many ports in the United States. So it's a very real and felt kind of reality that we live in now where the United States economy is at risk. And of course, and I think you'll hear more about this later, is rare earth metals is just one example, but not the only one where the Chinese use their market dominance in order to affect political changes in their adversaries or their partners in the world. But I'll leave that for later discussions, but I'd put that in the back. And the final thing that I would just kind of end on, and I think this goes back to the language that it really was towards the end of Trump's first term, and I would not be surprised if you see a return of that, and that is the understanding and principle of reciprocity, the way that a country treats American economic and people and security interest would be reciprocated in the United States and vice versa. So fairness, said another way, fairness, but reciprocity certainly is something that the Chinese Communist Party would be able to understand in very specific terms. The next one is to be able to outcompete the Chinese. We are in a new Cold War. I think that is a consensus, or fair to say that that is a consensus, as some might be very grudgingly come to use that term, but we are in effect in a new Cold War with the Chinese Communist Party. And that will require outcompeting them economically, and this gets into the topic of this panel, but of course also in security and also in the realm of ideas. And the point I want to make, and I keep harping back to, is those things are all conflated. They are all together. They're not separate and independent. And again, the final, in going back to supply chain resiliency, is another theme you're going to see a lot. And it's going to come up, I think, in several different sectors. You're going to see this also with energy and taking a new approach to renewables and also petroleum and the entering of the markets, or as President Trump has said, drill, baby, drill. So with that, I will conclude. Thanks, and look forward to questions.
Welcome, everyone. I have a slide presentation that's going to come up here. I guess I'll just have you guys advance it. First, I'd like to thank Congressman Pittenger and Lucas Rojas. I've had a great privilege to attend and participate in several of these events. The first thing, as someone who has put workshops together, it's a lot harder than it looks. And I'm just impressed how Congressman Pittenger really, it's not a skeleton crew, it's him and Lucas. So, and the Philippine people, yeah, your hosts make a big difference. But I'm very grateful. You know, it reminds me of a quote from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, right, the famous German theologian. He said, you know, there is meaning in every journey that is unknown to the traveler. And that is absolutely true for these events, Congressman. So thanks again. Now, yesterday, I really enjoyed John Strand's talk about Greenland because it reminded me that I'm playing chess and President Trump is playing three-dimensional. I mean, I'm playing checkers and President Trump is playing three-dimensional chess. It's clear to me that the standard ways we look at the world. So what I want to do today is look at the North American oil and gas production platform and talk a little bit about the kind of trauma for those who study American energy dominance and the prospects of the future these tariffs had, and also how we're going to reconsider what's really happening here. So let's go to the first slide. Okay, so what you need to understand about the North American oil and gas production platform, even the energy platform, is that it is a seamless, highly integrated market in which crude oil and products move back and forth across both borders and then out to the world market. And in fact, the North American oil and gas production platform does not draw on world supplies. We are net exporters of petroleum and natural gas to the world market. And disrupting these flows can be quite harmful to the productivity and long-term efficiency. And so you can see here that crude oil comes up from Mexico, comes down from Canada. This just shows you import flows. But I'll show you in a minute another picture where you'll see that the net effect of this, maybe, if you think about U.S. refiners, they are tuned to very advanced technology and they process heavy crude. But the U.S. produces enormous volumes of light crude. So we take the heavy crude from Canada, process it, and then we ship our lighter crude farther out. Next slide. Okay. So this is a very interesting picture. Between 2010 and 2020, the United States alone provided 80% of the increment in world oil demand that occurred during that period. In other words, you can see the prices here in gallons, like it was up to $3.50 down to $2. But in the absence of America's ability and, its technology, the shale oil revolution, to produce these vast quantities of incremental oil production, and we were part of the growth in demand, the world price of oil and the price of gasoline would have been much higher. So that's a sort of tribute to American ingenuity and also a constitutional republic which has private property and states which don't necessarily have to do everything the federal government wants them to do. Next slide. So this is something I don't think a lot of us understand, but this shows you North America, Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. What has happened since 1990? And you see these provinces, particularly the U.S., was completely written off as a prospective oil and gas producer. But over time, technology, private property in places like Texas, Oklahoma, North Dakota, resulted in advancements of extraction technology, and the U.S. production began to accelerate. And today you can see, if you take North America as a whole, as an integrated production platform, we are now a net exporter to the world market. By the way, that's true for the whole Western Hemisphere now with Brazil. The Western Hemisphere is not a net draw on world oil supplies. It's a net contributor. Next slide. So this shows North America's contribution to global natural gas supply. And I'm going to talk a little more about this later this afternoon, because I think we have a great opportunity to take a lot of the ideas of the new administration and President Trump for Africa. By the way, this year is the first time the G20 meeting will be held in Africa. It will be held in South Africa in November. And within the Trump administration, there's a lot of folks thinking about, okay, how can we give Africa the opportunities that we are benefiting in North America, which is access to large quantities of affordable fossil fuels. So while this is not directly related to tariffs, it's clear to me that the tariff strategy, as the previous speaker pointed out, the tariff strategy is really a process to try to move the system in a way that's more, actually beneficial to both parties, to deal with the security threat. I don't think President Trump really looks at the tariffs and say, oh, this is really the answer. They're a tool for him to try to move the system into a more productive spot for both parties. Next slide. This shows U.S. net oil trade with the world. So it is true that we import a lot of heavy crude from Canada, but we also export a lot of petroleum products and a lot of light sweet crude to the world market. So it's really, when you're dealing with a large continental landmass, it's not really easily divided from our neighbors and the production system. So you'll find natural gas flows back and forth across the Canadian border. Natural gas from the U.S. flows to Mexico. In fact, 2 ports on the west coast of Mexico are being constructed now to produce LNG, which will be exported to the Pacific Rim. In other words, they will bypass the Panama Canal. Next slide. So you can see here what's happened in the U.S. We are now major gas seller to the world market net. And by the way, there's a lot of discussion about how the U.S. provided enormous gas supplies to Europe after the invasion by Vladimir Putin. But actually, what really happened? You can't turn the switch on LNG overnight. It takes 5, 7, maybe 10 years, $10 billion to build a new LNG export facility. And by the way, we have massive reserves of natural gas. I was at an event in Texas where a very large independent producer said Today in Texas, because we have a lot of what's called associated gas, and it comes up the well bore with the oil, it's kind of associated, it's called associated gas. He can't do anything about it. He's looking for the oil, but he gets the oil in the gas. He said, gas has to go to negative $25 a million BTU before I'll stop producing the oil. In other words, now nearly 13 to 15% of U.S. natural gas supply is just because we're producing oil. And so we need to find outlets for that gas. I think it's an enormous opportunity for Asia. And I think that's something the administration is going to be, irrespective of what we're doing now. I see these tariffs more as a sort of short-term leverage strategy and not a long-term strategy by the administration. Next slide. Okay, so I think that's, we're going to talk a little bit more about this afternoon. So what I wanted to say is that the way to think about the energy prospects in the U.S., and actually the emergence of President Trump for a second term, is that he is not stuck in a sort of traditional paradigm of net zero. He's not stuck in any sort of paradigm that doesn't make sense to him. And so I do think the U.S. is an opportunity, and particularly in the Philippines, where, by the way, the Philippines is one of the few Asian markets on the power sector really operates principally on market forces. They don't subsidize power in the Philippines. This is an enormous opportunity for development of new LNG supplies, to enhance energy security throughout the Philippines. So within that context, I don't see the near-term trade maneuver, trade and the tariffs as disrupted to the long-term energy supplies and availability to the Asian markets. So I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lou. The floor is open now for questions and comments relative to these two presentations. Yes, sir, Dr. Strand. They're bringing a mic.
I think your comments, this goes so fast. My plan last night was to go to bed around 9, 10 o'clock. And then I had phone calls from politicians in Europe going on to like 2 o'clock in the night. I said, now I need to sleep. I think it's right now what's going on is amazing to see. I can understand that, and I can see in Europe a lot of politicians is very confused because they feel that an ally is turning their back to the U.S., the U.S. is turning their back to an ally. But on the other side, I must also see that maybe it's not beautiful, as some people would say, from a classical political perspective, but it's working. Ask a question. Where will we be in 3 months? Trump is going to be there 208 weeks. He's been there 2 weeks. There's 206 weeks more to go. If I look at the speed it's going with right now, it's going fast. When I heard that the taxes was hold this morning, and I saw it last night, and saw that the fact that Mexico is sending 10,000 troops to the borders and Canada's doing the same. What's the pitfall here? Because right now it looks like a 4-lane highway where Trump is basically controlling which way the highway goes, which speeds we are going in, and what's going to happen. What is the pitfall right now?
Thanks. So change is never easy, and the system that we've had in place, the Chinese have taken advantage, as we've talked about, but as yesterday's comments have made very clear, the world economic system is changed. It's not changing, it's changed already. And I think many of what we're seeing is trying to make sure that United States interests are secured in this new environment. And that includes with our allies and partners, but it's all led by national interest. So I don't see any abandonment, because for decades now, many of these, like your country, Denmark, and many others, we have decades of common interest, shared economies that are integrated. So I don't see a fracture. So there's no downside, I think, on that. Quite the contrary, I think what we're going to find is a reinvigoration of common economic, diplomatic, and military interest. I think you are, again, in the case of Denmark, we're seeing that with increased spending in defense. In your comments yesterday about Greenland, I think that's important to note that sometimes how we get to that may feel a little rough and certainly a little non-diplomatic, but change is never easy. And if it was able to be done in more, I guess, more gentlemanly and ladylike behavior, we would have done it 15 years ago when we first became aware of these changes. This is not something new. And that, I think, is what's driving the urgency. The downside that I haven't spoken about is the Chinese. If these actions taken not just by the United States but our allies doesn't consider what their countermeasures are going to be, we're going to be in what's called a tail chase, and we'll be continually outmaneuvered and outfoxed by the Chinese, which have shown a very high degree of adeptitude at working around sanctions, tariffs, and any type of regulatory framework that we put forward. And if that is allowed to occur without knowledge, we could find ourselves working against each other rather than as a united front against the bad behavior of the Chinese Communist Party, which does not comport with WTO standards.
Is there a chance that we get in the near future get